Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donohue. He is Daniel Gallen. We are fresh out of the press box at Beaver Stadium. And for those of you who joined us in Beaver Stadium today, there were apparently 107,000 plus of you. I hope you enjoyed the afternoon. There was a lot to like about these Nittany Lions and the performance that they gave the fans. There's a lot to like about what the Penn State coaching staff should be able to gather from a data standpoint, as they got to see a lot of this roster in action. We got to see some of these freshmen live up to the hype. Got a lot to talk about, some things to nitpick. There was also a commitment that came through here on Saturday evening. So let's get it started, Daniel. 46-10 is the final score. We all don't look like fools now because we picked Penn State to win well beyond the spread, which was 4 touchdowns. So we had confidence in the Nittany Lions coming into this. I will say, though, I think overall they played a cleaner game than I anticipated through 4 quarters, and that's while using a ton of guys.
Yeah, I think that's what you kind of worry about when you get to this point in this kind of game where there's a lot of guys where this is their first action, this is their first extended action. For a lot of guys today, it was their Beaver Stadium debuts, their collegiate debuts. And so in that situation, you can have, James Franklin mentioned the one fumble by Liam Clifford that kind of snuck by us. But yeah, I mean, I think that there weren't a lot of penalties. There weren't backbreaking turnovers. We can maybe talk about some of the sacks early on. But overall, it was Penn State came in and did what they needed to do. I thought that they just needed to get out to that early lead, get the young guys in and let them go to work, use it as an opportunity to get guys reps. And they did just that.
Yeah, Penn State got touchdowns off their first couple possessions. And we also saw Nick Singleton go bonkers on the second possession, 70-yard touchdown run, showing exactly what he's capable of, showing off that long-distance threat that has been missing. And it was really the first moment that we've witnessed like that out of the Penn State backfield, I feel like, since we were down in Dallas, and you weren't even on the beat yet, watching Penn State beat Memphis in the Cotton Bowl and Journey Brown run crazy. This was a refreshing moment for a lot of Penn State fans and a validating one for everybody who's been on the Nick Singleton bandwagon for a long time, a guy who was the Gatorade Player of the Year, of course, across the country for college football. And last week we got a nice peek at him, but this was totally different. And you wrote about it, Daniel, afterward. We got a few freshmen to spotlight. We've got a bunch of other guys to talk about as well. But Singleton, to me, is the big storyline here because he required only 10 carries to get to 179 yards. He had the 70-yard touchdown first. Later on in the game, when fellow 5-star freshman Drew Allar is in the backfield with him, he races 44 yards for his second touchdown of the afternoon. 3 different guys in this game scored their first college touchdown. He scored 2 of them.
Yeah, I think I think this is my first time ever seeing a Penn State running back crest 100 yards in a professional capacity. So big landmarks all around for everyone today. But Nick Singleton, I wrote about that this was kind of what we were waiting for. This was how Nick Singleton was advertised, and he kind of teased it against Purdue, where especially that first carry, he got tripped up, 9-yard gain. You could just tell that he looked different than Kevon Lee. He looked different than Devin Ford. Even last year, he looked different than Noah Cain. And so we kind of knew what type of running back he was. And it just was only a matter of time before he was able to show that off. And that happened to be today in the first half with that 70-yarder where Brenton Strange and Caden Wallace wiped out 3 guys. I kind of missed that block until Tyler Warren pointed it out after the game. But then you look at Sal Wormley out in front getting a block, and then Nick Singleton sheds a tackler and is gone. I think that you saw him when he got to the second level. He was just running away from guys. He had that 48-yarder in the third quarter where he got chased down, but Ohio had a good angle on him there. But it was just kind of there was a bit of a thrill every single time he touched the ball. Where it was, all right, this is what we came for. This is what Nick Singleton came here to do, and we got to see it. It will be interesting to see how this translates to Auburn, how it translates to some of these Big Ten defenses. I think that 44-yarder, he went horizontal for a while to get to the edge and then took off. Can you do that against Michigan or Ohio State or Michigan State? We'll see. But I think the fact that he was able to do it against a MAC team, he's just able to do it period, is a big takeaway for Penn State fans moving forward.
His 70-yard touchdown run made this a 14-0 game. His 44-yard touchdown run really helped this one feel like it was completely on ice. It already felt that way, but 40-7, it just felt completely unreachable by then. That was with about 4 minutes to go in the third quarter. And that run to me, although it was the shorter of the two, Daniel, was the more impressive and eye-opening, because when he was trying to stretch this thing out to the right, it wasn't like he had all the room in the world and he was just following a path. He had to create there, and it was the exact kind of run that, all due respect to everybody who's been in this backfield since Journey Brown stepped aside because of medical reasons, no one else is doing that. And I don't think anybody else is even gaining 6-7 yards on that kind of a run unless they go beast mode and break some tackles. And again, not really something that's been prevalent in this backfield. So Nick Singleton, not just to pick up 10 yards in that play, which I thought would have been an impressive feat, but then to take it to the next level and then outrace the defensive backs all the way to that 44-yard touchdown run, showed a different gear, and it also added some credence to something Jaywan Sider told us during the last week of August camp in comparing Journey Brown and Nick Singleton, who he says have the best straightaway speed in this backfield in recent years. He talked about Journey Brown being a smooth kind of glider, a track kind of runner, where in this case, there's a violent and aggressive nature to the way Nick Singleton carries that rock. Nittany Lions fans got a peek today. I think to your point, the next step in his process is going to be something James Franklin used to talk about with Saquon Barkley, with Miles Sanders, about taking what the defense gives you and not always being tempted to bounce it outside and turn it to something big. But you'll take some of those gambles because if you have a guy who can make those pay off, and Nick Singleton can, those are the kind of plays that win you games that maybe you shouldn't get away with a W.
That Cider comment really, I think, is very striking, because it was the type of thing where it felt like you could see Nick Singleton go to that next gear, where it felt like you could see him kind of, shift and then pull away from guys. Whereas I think Journey Brown, in my very limited time watching him on TV, it was kind of that glider thing where he would just kind of pull away from guys and you wouldn't really notice it until 20
It was a
yards
beautiful
later.
thing.
So
I don't want to
no
shortchange
one's
it. It was
there.
a beautiful way to run the football. This is a little bit different, and this is one that I think you kind of match up with some of the more highly touted running backs at the NFL level. This is the way they run the football.
Exactly. And I think that when you look at this moving forward, kind of what we talked about, I think we talked about this during the game where you did the classic little math problem of, well, if you take away the 70-yard run, what is he averaging? And we talked about it, where the fact that the 70-yard run is there, it doesn't really, it kind of cancels out those 2, 3, 4-yard gains. I remember when I was covering the Eagles, it was the same thing with Miles Sanders, where he would break off these, 1, 2, 3, long runs a game. And people would be like, well, if you take it away, what is he doing? He's, he's going horizontal too much, but that's why he's in the game. He's in the game to be a game breaker. You can live with that stuff because you're going to get a 40-yard run, a 50-yard run. Whereas last year, we kind of knew they weren't going to get that for the most part. So it is going to be really interesting to see how this, looks moving forward. But I think we wanted Nick Singleton to look like a 5-star running back on a Big Ten team going up against MAC defenders, and that is exactly what we saw.
Yeah, just at a different level, and that's to anybody on the field. Another major step forward next week for him and this entire Nittany Lions offense as they hit the road once more and go take on an SEC opponent in Auburn. But we'll have plenty of time to talk about that next week, and I want to get to the other 5-star freshman in just a moment. But a quick review of what happened today at running back, because James Franklin told us on Wednesday night after practice they were looking at a 1-to-1-to-1 kind of approach, similar to what we saw week 1 at Purdue. I know that's infuriating for a lot of fans, so many of you are probably happy that got blown up because they found a hot hand. We saw Nick Singleton get some sequential possessions where he could get a little bit of a rhythm going, but let's keep it in perspective. 10 carries. It wasn't a workhorse kind of day. It didn't need to be a workhorse kind of day. And overall, it wasn't really a lot of work for the running backs. You had Katron Allen get 6 carries for 23 yards. That was highlighted by an 11-yard run, so not a lot going on beyond that. He did have a 22-yard reception, and that's a second straight game where Katron Allen has shown his abilities as a receiver out of the backfield. And then the guy who got lost in the shuffle today was Kevon Lee. He got the start. He had 1 carry for 0 yards. He had 1 reception for 8 yards. And as far as we could tell, looked healthy, looked physically available, but took the back seat as this game progressed. And this kind of sets the stage for a question that who is the first running back to trot out there with the first team offense on the road at Auburn and what will be a showcase primetime kind of a view for a lot of people. And to me, it's hard to imagine that Nick Singleton doesn't get the bulk of work. I'm not going to necessarily say that Kevon Lee doesn't get the first rep right now, but Singleton, if you want to search for the hot hand, unless you want to bury your head in the sand as a staff, Penn State, you found it.
James Franklin, after the game, he made a point to say they did stick to the 1-to-1-to-1 rotation, even though I think it's probably halfway through the first quarter, it didn't really feel like much of a rotation. But like you said, I can see it moving forward as a situation where Kevon Lee is still the first running back out. He was that today, where he was on the field for the first two plays, and then Nick Singleton came on for the third play. And it did feel like there was a little bit. This is anecdotal, but it did feel like there was a little bit more mixing and matching within drives than there was last week. Where last week it was very straightforward, very rigid. And I personally, I feel like that kind of fluidity, I think, can help probably get these guys going a little bit more when it isn't so delineated. But we've talked about this rotation a lot, but it is going to be interesting. I mean, you can't ignore what Nick Singleton did today. I don't, even if you try really hard, I don't think you can. I still think we're going to see a lot of Kaytron Allen. He didn't lose any yards on any of his runs today, which is always something that I feel like you need to look at with a young running back. And he did have that nice catch. So he can do some, I feel like that he's been a little bit more multi-dimensional than he was kind of billed as coming out of IMG. But, I think we saw last week that they gave the ball to Kevon. They put the ball in Kevon Lee's hands in a really big spot in a game. So I think the true test to what this rotation is or who's the lead back, even if Nick Singleton were to carry the ball 12 times through the first three quarters at Auburn next week, who's in there in the fourth quarter? Who's in there in the 4-minute offense trying to burn the clock? Who's in there in the 2-minute offense trying to win the game?
And as a reminder, at Purdue in that final drive, the game-winning drive, it was Kaytron Allen and it was Kevon Lee out there at running back during that one. This afternoon, though, Nick Singleton certainly in the spotlight. There was a 40-year span for Penn State where no Penn State freshman ran for 100 yards in a season opener, and Devin Ford changed that in 2019. He went for, I think, 109 yards. That was impressive, but this was the most rushing yards for any Penn State player in their Beaver Stadium debut. So, hello, that's really impressive. I mean, Nick Singleton, if you want to start piling up the accolades at the collegiate level, that's a nice way to do it. We know he came to town with a bunch of them. Speaking of accolades, Drew Allar, obviously a guy who was our number one quarterback in the entire country at 24/7 Sports, an Elite 11 finalist. Go down the list, he probably did it. Mr. Ohio football. Got here in January, and we all kind of wondered what this would look like if he would be able to first beat Bo Perbula and then eventually beat Christian Veillere. And now here we are, and it's very clear. And although we talked about it this week on the podcast because it wasn't so clear back then, but he is QB2. And James Franklin opted to kind of dance around that subject this week, and maybe he was sincere about it. But there was no doubt when they got into this matchup, Franklin said it was already kind of prepackaged planning to have Drew come in the second quarter for one series and then in the third quarter for one series. So that was their blueprint going into the game before scores even started happening. The way the second quarter kind of wrapped up and finished, James Franklin says it just wasn't going to work out the way they wanted it to. Penn State yet again has a late touchdown drive in a half. They've been killing it. That was 4 touchdowns now they've scored in the final 2 minutes of halves. Wasn't a concern for them in the second half today, but they've been money in that situation. Sean Clifford drove them down the field. Clifford was back on the field, Daniel, for the first possession of the second half. Ended up with Jake Pinniger's missed field goal. Pinniger's on our list to get to, don't worry. But then Drew Allar comes in. 4 possessions, 3 touchdowns. One of those touchdowns was courtesy of that Nick Singleton 44-yard run, and Drew didn't have to throw the ball once. But he had to orchestrate this offense. He threw his first 2 career touchdowns, and of his 6 completions, each of them went to a different receiver. Came out of this game, speaking from James Franklin, speaking with his teammates, everybody's really excited about number 15 right now.
I think the kind of a big tell as to how his teammates feel about him and the impression he's made is talking to the defensive players. And we talked to Adisa Isaac after the game, and Adisa said, "You guys this might be new to you, but it's old to us that we've been seeing this since Drew got there in January." Jair Brown, spoke really glowingly of him, and so I think that guys know the type of talent he is. That they know what he's capable of, and he really showed it today. That I think that you look at kind of the total package. It was kind of it felt like a very full experience. Obviously, last week only one series. You're not going to get the full effect, but this we saw him take a sack for the first time. We saw him be under duress with a free rusher coming and him stepping up in the pocket, moving, hitting Khalil Dinkins for the touchdown. It just really looked kind of, you were able to see him in different situations that we hadn't seen him in before. He ran the ball, no, 5 rushes for 11 yards. I think that's probably I'm not 4 for 17 if you factor out the sack. But he was able to use his legs, and James Franklin brought that up as something that is on tape now. So when Drew Allar is in there, that's something else that defenses will have to account for. So, I think that he just kind of, like we've said, he looked the part. The ball looked good. 6 of 8. One of those incompletions was to Omari Evans, where Allar went to the outside shoulder. Omari Evans turned to the inside. But it seemed like that he had good chemistry. Like you said, 6 completions to 6 wide receivers. He got Evans the touchdown. He got Dinkins the touchdown. He got Caden Saunders his first career catch. It was just a very complete and I think that you should just feel really good about this quarterback coming in.
Yeah, the 8-yard run was the highlight of his rushing efforts today. But to me, like when you think about his mobility, it's not what's reflected in the box scores. What was reflected in him buying time, not making mistakes. I mean, look, before I covered Penn State, I had a chance to cover national recruiting for a few years, and that involved me going to every big quarterback camp all year round. And I was always amazed that when some of these just superstar quarterback recruits at the high school level, you'd see them surface on a college field down the road for the first time, and all of a sudden you're like, what, they got zapped of their poise. They got zapped of everything that made them special. And maybe the arm talent's still there, but there's no pocket presence. Their eyes are dropping when the rest comes. That's the exact opposite of how Drew Allar has answered the bell in a limited appearance on the road last week, which was a very different environment than the one that greeted him here in Happy Valley. I mean, it was a lot to cheer about today. I'm not sure we heard a louder applause sustained for when Drew Allar entered the game as quarterback in the third quarter. People were really excited, and he lived up to that hype in this situation. He's going to have to keep doing it for the rest of his career, and he's going to face a much larger spotlight as things progress. But look, there's pressure on his shoulders every time he takes a snap right now. That's what happens when you're the number 1 quarterback in the country. And what I like about his demeanor and what I love what we hear from the teammates is he is just approaching things like he is the new kid in town, and like he has a lot to learn. Because I don't know if you've noticed, but 5-star quarterbacks and their families can carry a little bit of an ego, and they can bring that to a locker room, and that can change some dynamics. And if things aren't going right or things are going right, it can kind of, their mood can dictate how teammates feel, and it can create a schism at times within a locker room. Drew Allar sounds like he's sitting back with his notebook and only speaking when spoken to, was the phrasing that Jair Brown used. And he said the only time that changes, where Drew goes from being, the quiet freshman who's trying to absorb everything to a guy who can take command, is when he's doing those checks at the line, when he's out there with 10 other guys in the offense. And I absolutely love that, because he's balancing being this behind the scenes kind of student while also embracing his opportunity and saying, you know what, I am ready for this moment. I don't need to tell everybody. And clearly whatever he's doing is working, because I think there's a lot of love for Christian Veilleux in this locker room, among this coaching staff. And it wasn't a decision that they took lightly to set him aside. He did get some work late. He finished 6 of 7. But Drew Allar is clearly the next quarterback in. And regardless of the scoreboard in Auburn, you have to wonder if Penn State doesn't find a way to make it 3 for 3 on the season and getting him involved in game action.
I don't think James Franklin will be able to dance around the number 2 quarterback question this week if that comes in. I think that Allar kind of showed who he is. But yeah, I think that looking forward, it is interesting to see how you could incorporate Allar into this offense. We can probably have this conversation later this week because he's not really the dual threat guy that you put in where you're going to start running the ball a lot. His skill set is it isn't necessary. It doesn't fit the typical change of pace quarterback.
And
I
Sean Clifford
guess.
hasn't really been that guy so far I mean, hasn't been asked to be. He hasn't needed to be, I guess you could say.
Mhm.
I mean, we've seen it in the past where they have had to lean on him as a runner, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing for the Nittany Lions. But today, Clifford, 14 rushing yards, second consecutive game. He had a short run. But to me, I think what stood out was Bryce Effner said it. I think we heard it from Harrison Wallace as well. It felt like to them when Drew Allar stepped in, there was no change. It was a different quarterback, but the offense could flow as it needed to. And in the past, we've seen when Penn State has to go to QB2, they've got to reconfigure everything. And obviously the most glaring example of that occurred last October.
Even Sean mentioned that earlier this week when he was talking about when he left and Aller had to come in. That he said that there was I forget the phrasing that he used, but there wasn't any hiccup. That
Yeah.
there were no steps back. That's how he put
Yeah.
it. That when Aller came in, things didn't take a step back. And I think that's probably the best endorsement you can give a backup quarterback. That things don't change when they come in. And I think that where Aller is in his career, I think that's kind of the first major compliment that you need to get from your teammates and from your coaches. And then it's just kind of all building from there. And what is it building to? I guess we'll see over these next few weeks and months, but it's really promising. I don't really think you could ask for a better, first two games, first two appearances from Drew Aller coming in at the beginning of this year.
Oh, by the way, the 6th-year senior, 4th-year team captain, Sean Clifford, 19 of 27, 213 yards, 1 touchdown throwing, 1 touchdown passing, no turnovers in about 33 minutes of game action. He was an observer the rest of the way. I know he was excited to see Drew get his shot. I also know he, as a 6-year senior, doesn't like leaving the field at any point over the course of a game. But look, Sean Clifford, Drew Allar, and you go down to Christian Veillere, and we'll learn more about Bo Perbula as things goes on. But it's very clear through 2 weeks what we forecasted has been accurate. This quarterback room is as strong as it's been, at least since I've covered this team, when you can go 3 deep like that. And I think James Franklin's got to have a lot of confidence in that room moving ahead. Now, there are some questions in some other spots. Tight end room, there were a couple missing components. One, not necessarily a big deal. Jerry Cross, a true freshman. Theo Johnson, though, second consecutive game that he is absent from game action. We didn't see him when we got a peek at practice on Wednesday. During his Thursday radio show, James Franklin referenced there were some bumps and bruises involved with Theo Johnson. So we do know that it's a medical-related issue. With him off the field, you mentioned it, Dinkins got a touchdown. Brenton Strange had that explosive touchdown in the first game, more of a quiet day-to-day, although you mentioned some of his blocking efforts helped trigger things. Tyler Warren, again, some key catches, but not a loud day for the tight end room. But I think we're all wondering, can they get Theo Johnson back? That's something we'll be monitoring. And then Daniel, still 2 absences on the defensive line. And these are of a different nature, and they're ones that we'll have to monitor starting with the travel roster when this team shows up in Auburn.
No Smith Vilbert and no Keziah Izzard again on the defensive line. They were out there during warmups in sneakers, and then when everyone went into the locker room, they came out in their jerseys, sweatpants, sneakers. They're standing with the injured Zariah Fisher watching. So James Franklin wouldn't give any any indication as to their status on Wednesday. He said that he wasn't ready to make a public comment about it. So we'll have to wait and see there. But I think that you look at the defensive end group. Amin Vanover had a very loud game today. Denai Dennis Sutton hasn't quite had his big first splash play yet, but he has first career tackle today, I believe. So that's kind of another step with these freshmen getting involved. And then on the interior, we saw the usual rotation behind PJ Mustapher with Devon Elise, Jordan Vandenberg, Zane Durant, and someone I know I'm forgetting. So
it's a deep group.
Well, I know. I think we can go 6 deep there, and I could only get to 5 with Izzard. So it's 9:54. We'll get there, but I think that the defensive line has been kind of a pleasant I don't want to say surprise, but it was kind of an area we were really curious about coming in, especially after how things went last year. Some of the new pieces with Chop Robinson transferring in, Adisa Isaac and PJ Mustafer coming back from injury, and you feel good about it. At the same time, uh, you kind of want Smith Vilbert and Keziah Izzard to be available because they are experienced guys. Even if they just end up being depth, they've played, they've had their flashes, and we saw last year how quickly this depth can disappear. So I think that that's a situation that you want to monitor. It hasn't hurt Penn State yet because of some of these other players on the depth chart. I think that having Zane Durant ready to play as a true freshman, Amin Vanover stepping up in some of these situations, that's really mitigated the loss or the absence of Vilbert and Izzard. But you need bodies in the trenches. I think that that's been a big lesson for Penn State the past few years, and the more the better.
I'm with you. Vanover, by the way, I mean, a couple of games in a row now where he warrants attention. And you say 56 is going to play a lot of football for this team. And that's maybe not something that we forecasted as much, considering the depth at defensive end and defensive tackle, as we've discussed. And by the way, Chop Robinson, I mean, no one, in my opinion, is flying around in that front group more impressively than him, and not always reflected in the stat sheet, but he is disrupting plays. He batted down a ball. It was something that he discussed with us, trying to have that be a part of his game. For a guy who's just getting his feet underneath him at defensive end, already looks like one of the most important figures for this Penn State defense through 8 quarters of the season. And I didn't think I was going to say that. I thought he might look like a real strong supplemental piece right now, and a guy you can kind of say, what's it look like come November? He's already there in a lot of ways in terms of this staff, getting him a lot of run. And I'm really excited to see how it goes for a guy who has 3 years of eligibility that he brought here. And, so he's only a sophomore, and it's not an Arnold Ebiketie 1-year rental kind of deal. There's a lot to love about from both ends, how the Chop Robinson experiment is working out for both parties here. And Daniel, we do have to also dive over a little bit to some of the defensive personnel, because it was a lot going on today. And Jair Brown continues to creep up. He told me a little bit about it after the game, how much he's loving it. He's playing essentially the Mike linebacker role when they're wheeling out 7 defensive backs. And we said, what are they going to do? Is Manny Diaz going to go deep and bring a bunch of these guys on the field at the same time? And the answer has been absolutely yes. You're going to see 3 safeties on the field together, Jair Brown playing up. And this was something that he said has been kind of part of the game plan for Penn State since the spring. It isn't something that popped up in preseason camp. They felt like Jair Brown had the size, had the athleticism, and really also the leadership ability to go in that role and kind of direct traffic. And it's been really impressive to see them implement this on third down plays. And you look across the field at all the DBs, and yet you're not lacking for size. And this 3-man front we saw today was Beeman, Isaac, and Chop, I believe. And I just absolutely love that. So give me more of that. And I know Jair Brown says the same thing. He said, Manny Diaz, let's go. He likes this a lot. So look, Manny Diaz getting creative. Penn State going very deep across the offensive positions. A bunch of guys getting their first catches, first touches. There's also some special teams to play. And that meant Jake Pinniger was in the spotlight a few moments, and first field goal of the season was good. That one was from within 30 yards. His second from 42 went wide right, and then he missed an extra point, which was a very ugly point after touchdown attempt later in the game. So this was a question that came up for James Franklin. It's a story you wrote, and to me, not much of a pain when you win by 36. It's just something to write about, something for some people to complain about. But I don't see a lot of 36-point wins in Penn State's future. When I look at the rest of their schedule, I see a lot of 4 or 5-point wins, 2-point wins, maybe some 2-point losses, though, if you don't have everything put together from a place kicker standpoint. And I know Jake Pinniger's played a lot of football. He's respected in this locker room for sticking around, winning the job back. But this cannot be a consistent problem.
Well, I went through and looked at the schedule last year, and Penn State, 4 of their 6 losses were by 4 points or less. And today, Jake Pinniger left 4 points out there with the missed field goal and the missed extra point. So I think that kind of shows you the type of margin that Penn State is going to be, margin for error that Penn State is going to be looking at as you get deeper into the schedule. And yeah, I mean, you at this point, you can't have those misses. I don't necessarily think it was a total surprise that Pinniger came out of camp as the kicker, given his experience, his track record. You kind of know what you're going to get. But I do think that Sanders Zahadak is a very intriguing kicker. We saw him make a couple from 55 yards during warmups today. We also saw Jake Pinniger hit from about 52 and a half yards. So both of those guys have legs. It was interesting to hear James Franklin talk about it. He pointed toward the line as an issue here, with Ohio getting a really good push and being able to affect the kicks. There was someone that really got through the left side and was basically in Jake Pinniger's face on the missed 42-yard field goal, which didn't miss by that much when looking at the TV copy. But then the extra point, again, Ohio got a really good push. It's a group of offensive linemen and defensive linemen. I think Fatorma Molba was out there, Jake Wilson, and then a host of other offensive linemen like Caden Wallace, Jimmy Christ, Golden Israel Achumba around Crystal and Tyler Jazansky, the long snappers. So I think that'll be it's kind of one of the more, I guess, under the radar things coming out of this. Not necessarily the missed kicks, but maybe the mechanics of what went into it. So I think that'll be something to watch. James Franklin has been pretty bold about the emphasis that he puts on special teams. You look at the travel roster last week, and they had 2 kickers, 2 punters, and 2 long snappers. We know that Penn State puts a lot of scholarships into its specialists, and they want results. So it'll be interesting to see what exactly this looks like, if there do need to be personnel changes, and how that, I guess, comes to be a little bit.
You reminded me because of you're right. Franklin pointed out the front on those kicks as being an issue, something they want to get cleaned up. Just took me back to noting that we have some house cleaning to do on the offensive line. I just wanted to say Hunter Norzad, it was a shared role again on the left side. Norzad exited the game midway through for some time after staying down, dealt with whatever injury he had, came back out there. He played some center today. The first time we've seen that. It's what we've heard happening on the practice field. This is a guy who played tackle at Cornell, was an all Ivy League tackle. He's now been a bunch of work at left guard and now some work at center. So they're utilizing him. And it was a lot of Bryce Effner at right tackle. It was a lot of Caden Wallace at right tackle. It was certainly a rotation, as James Franklin had told us it would be. And I think at the end of the day, when you produce 572 yards and you're able to run the football with a lot of help from that freshman, we're going to spend less time talking about the offensive line. And there were fewer questions after the game about the offensive line. And they have a big test next week against an SEC opponent. I do want to get back to special teams because you have assigned yourself to the Barney Amore beat for Lions 24/7. And he had another really impressive performance.
That punt that Penn State that downed at the 1, great play by Malik Mega to be patient with it. He went into the end zone, reestablished himself in the field of play, caught the ball in the 1. I think that we saw last week when Daquan Hardy got a little too excited about getting the ball down there that he knocked it in. But that was just a very beautiful punt. I mean, to me, it bounced inside the 1, very close to the goal line. He got it to come back. I think I was watching this trajectory from the press box, and I was kind of going to be like, oh, like, nice try. That was really close, but touchback. Okay. But he got it to land and he got it to die. And it's, that's great. He had a 52-yarder with a friendly bounce. And then he had another punt downed inside the 10 at the end of the game that Malik Mega also ran down. So I guess it's also a note that we're seeing some rotation at the gunner spots after that was Keaton Ellis and Daquan Hardy last week. We saw Malik Mega at wide receiver a little bit today for the first time, but it's clear that they're trying to utilize his speed. But back to Barney Amore, I think that maybe overall through the first 2 weeks of the season, given what Jordan Stout was last year and what Penn State had to replace, I think that you'd have to say Barney Amore is the most pleasant surprise or the most surprising player, unexpected, performance that we've seen through these first 2 weeks. But special teams is it can win you a couple games, it can lose you a couple games, and I think that Penn State has done a good job of making sure that it's mostly the winning the games.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I think in terms of someone who's exceeded expectations or kind of answered a question that we have, this one is really trending in the right direction in a hurry. There will be continued tests for a punter, and all it takes is one shank for everyone to flip on him and go the other way. But if you were following Ohio's punting situation today, you see what bad punting can do and how it affects you and affects field position. There was a reason that Penn State always seemed to be starting near midfield over the course of today. I think that we touched on just about everything from the game we wanted to get to on this one. There is a lot to talk about in terms of the freshman usage. A lot of things to comb through between now and our next episode, which will come on Monday. Daniel, I want to get into the commitment just for a minute or two, but anything else to empty out of the notebook? We've got a bunch of written content at lions247.com that we hope you'll go over and read and check out, and we'll continue to have that up into Sunday. But anything else you want to make sure that people are aware of from our experience at Beaver Stadium today?
Just from a personnel side, Abdul Carter got some run that as we were planning. He made it through his first snap and got to the second. So that was someone who, when I go to rewatch the game, I'm going to be keeping an eye on. And then the other, I guess, really interesting, just from a guy that we've barely talked about, Jaden Dotton. Sean Clifford targeted him on the first play of the game. He had 2 catches for 14 yards. Or 15 yards. So I think that for 14 yards, sorry, the yak and he caught the ball behind the line of scrimmage. So the yak was a little funky there, but that was someone that we hadn't seen in a while. So I'm sure we'll have more of these guys to go through, but those were the 2 just off the top of my head, because I know that we talked a lot about Abdul Carter last week. James Franklin talked a lot about him, and we got to see him, and we got to see him for an extended time.
Yeah, Tig Brown tonight said he believes that Abdul Carter is the next great Penn State linebacker. So there you go. In terms of a guy who's 2 games in his career and hasn't accomplished a whole lot yet, what is brewing behind the scenes and what we're hearing coming out of the Lasch building, really since he got to campus, leads you to believe that Penn State picked up a really special talent at linebacker and Abdul Carter. And by the way, Jaden Dotton's a perfect example of this. James Franklin, it's a feel-good kind of day. It's not just about getting all these high-profile freshmen work. Some of these guys who have been working their butts off for 3 or 4 years in their program for one reason or another, it hasn't worked out. Some of the walk-on guys who are essentially can feel like practice squad dummies at times, and just getting hit constantly for the betterment of the team. For them to go out there and assert themselves, hit somebody else, and feel like they're the aggressor, it's a great opportunity, and it's the kind of galvanizing moment where you should show up to the facilities tomorrow and everybody's feeling pretty good about where they're at ahead of a big matchup, and things are going to get really, really real for Penn State in a hurry as this schedule moves on. So Zion Tracy was on campus for the last couple of days. He's on an official visit out of Oakdale, St. Thomas More up in Connecticut, and he committed on Saturday night. Decided he wasn't going to wait until he left campus. I actually saw James Franklin giving Zion Tracy a hug before he left the field after this matchup. And Tracy decided to announce on Friday morning or Saturday night. I don't know why I said Friday morning. Saturday night when we were in the press box. And by the time we sat down here, the story was up from Brian Doan. Quotes on Lions 24/7 about why this decision came through. Tracy was a guy that we've covered here on the podcast. Came to camp, wowed the staff with not just his 40-yard dash numbers in late July at that camp, which were sub 4.4, but also in going mano a mano with Ajani Shakir, wide receiver commit for Penn State, a 4-star prospect by 24/7 Sports Evaluation. And Tyler Calvaruso, our recruiting reporter, dropped a really good nugget on the message board tonight about just why Zion Tracy has generated some buzz here. He's a guy who's come on late, got a Penn State offer just in the last couple of weeks, and now he's committed, joining this 2023 recruiting class. We'll get to know him a lot more in our next episode. We'll have Tyler Calvaruso back on to break down a big weekend in Beaver Stadium. First time they've had a group of recruits on campus like this for a game since last November. So a lot to catch up on the recruiting trail on Monday, and we'll have Daniel back on to go through whatever we missed today, and probably a lot of different stuff, and go through our notes a bit. Daniel, long day. Appreciate you for sticking through with us here. We're now after 10 o'clock. I think we were chatting in the press box at Beaver Stadium before 10 a.m. So thanks for all the work you put in today. Thanks to our producer, Lance Glynn. I'm Tyler Donohue. For everyone, this is the Lions 24/7 podcast. We'll talk to you real soon.